Y'all, I have a friend who has been a midwife for over 20 years, and she actually became a midwife after she free birthed her first. So, of course, I had to talk to her about the Guardian article about Free Birth Society. Welcome to High Spirit Podcast. I'm Elise Entz, and today we're talking to my dear friend Steph Berry, herbalist and midwife with over 20 years of experience birthing outside the system. Steph and I became close friends after she attended the birth of my second child at home in rural Texas, and we just never stopped talking about birth. So I'm like, yeah, we got to talk about this because there's so much nuance in birth between the extremes of obstetrics in the medical industrial complex and no prenatal care free birthing. If you're a mother who is interested in birthing and raising children outside of the systems, please join us. Let's go. Steph, why is everybody talking about Free Birth Society?
Oh man. Okay, so this article came out, right? And we heard how the insider experience was. And I think a lot of people didn't know what really kind of goes on inside the conversations of people considering free birth, especially like the mainstream community of birth. And so it's a big deal to hear these sort of negative outcomes happening for women who aren't getting prenatal care or choosing different birth routes. And I think a lot of midwives also feel a little bit called to speak about it because we do take care of women as our life's work. And it can really it can bring up that hard conversation about how safe is birth and where should it be and like how regulated should it be, or what are these crazy ladies doing out in the woods having babies, like it just brings up this array, right, of like what's really going on outside of the hospital for
Mhm.
birth.
So, The Guardian wrote about free birth, these women who are birthing without attendants, so without midwives, and only with casual attendants, either friends, doula types, but not explicitly licensed midwives. How are women getting to this point? There's a lot of pearl clutching in the comments of like, how could anybody choose something so irresponsible? And I had considered free birth. I have my reasons for that. But why do you think women are getting to the point of wanting to choose free birth?
Yeah. Mostly, I think women have lost trust in the systems that do exist and probably from their either previous experience, right? Like they've had hospital births, of course, is the place most women get traumatized and have this backlash of a reaction, or don't know anything about birth yet and they're already living sort of a more autonomous, medical freedom minded life. And that has come out of experiences that we've all had in the last 5 years, more so too, right? So they're looking for women also, I think, speaking with some authority, speaking out on how they're feeling. And of course, we all live in a world where I want to say drama, but we're like where that big extremes win out in the conversation, right? Or get the most attention.
Yeah, there's definitely a piece of the radical extremes get the most clicks. They're pushed by the algorithm because of that dopamine pushing system.
Yeah.
And that was how I found Free Birth Society originally. I had an experience. I tried to birth my first child at home, was transferred to the hospital. In retrospect, felt like my experience was overly medicalized by my midwife, and I was railing against it and looking for something to fill that gap. And I encountered Yolanda Norris Clark, one of the co-founders of Free Birth Society, and her work. And she was using this language around like self-responsibility and autonomy and choosing your personal authority. And it was very resonant and appealing to me. And when I floated the idea of free birth to my husband, he was like, no way. And there was a lot of conversation that ensued after that of like why he didn't feel comfortable with the choice of free birth. The Free Birth Society, like Emily and Yolanda would say, oh, well, your husband's just immature and scared and doesn't know enough and isn't in his place, and this is your choice, which I found not holistic because it's like, he's my husband. He's going to be accompanying this birth. He is also responsible for me in this space. So we're talking about this. And then I find you something that felt a little bit more in between. It seems like you attract people who are considering free birth. Can you describe why that is?
Right. Okay. Let me start by saying, like, I had my first child without an attendant present. after seeing a midwife and getting some prenatal care. And as I had that process, I was like, I want more support. That was kind of hard. I didn't know enough. And I felt, I want to say gypped, but I felt sort of marginalized because I couldn't find a way to get this information about your body in pregnancy, postpartum. And again, the internet wasn't like super, it's not what it is now. There was no social media. So I wanted to fill that gap also as a natural extension of my own experience. But I also didn't really want to be a midwife. So I think I already come from a middle road too. So I naturally see women who are looking for the autonomy already or who live a pretty conscious, self-aware life. So I speak to that also in my services as a midwife. They don't want to be doing this in isolation. And I do think that drives a lot of the outreach to me specifically versus just looking for a home birth midwife. And wanting education along the way. Like, how can I be the most prepared? Maybe the big thread is like trust, but trust in the process of birth. And I think you can't do that without more information than we have as a society in America. It's women with their bodies and like the stories we've been told about health and how our bodies work. And I think most people still need a little bit of an experienced sister support caregiver, at least the first time they do it, or the first time they're considering doing it at school.
Yeah, that was something the article touched on is this sort of extreme of like, if people can't get on board with your free birth, give birth at a hotel or don't tell your husband you're going into labor. I have heard some of that rhetoric inside the free birth society circles, not free birth as a whole, but free birth society, which is who the article is
Right.
talking about. And I found that there were a lot of red flags there in terms of there's this really extreme perspective of hierarchy, like free birth is at the top. You're like the best birther. If you're free birthing, you
Right.
have to have an attendant, then you are like somehow secondary or you don't trust yourself.
Mhm.
And my husband and I talked about this a lot when I was pregnant with my second. His point was you can still trust yourself and ask somebody else to fix your brakes. Like you're not going to try to fix your brakes on your own because you're fully autonomous. That's not realistic. And that comes back to this as well of sometimes asking for help is the best thing we can do for ourselves. It is autonomous to recognize a need for social support.
Yeah, so much. That's one of the big things in the article because it's highlighting such a clear way that doing it on your own can go wrong. And also, everyone needs something different all the time. No one person's health concern, emotional state, life circumstance, you're going to get the same result by doing the same thing. And in birth and pregnancy, it's really the time where you learn what that is. You're taking care of another human for 9 months. You're going to have to eat differently. You're going to eat more food. You're going to have these symptoms that you've never had before. So it's like, when in life do we do something we've never done before all by ourselves without anyone who's ever done it? It doesn't exist. We're humans. We were all born to a mom that had to go through this process. So to say that you don't trust yourself if you don't do it alone, let alone without your husband, is pretty, yeah, extreme. And sometimes babies do just come out on their own without anybody even really knowing they're pregnant, right? That's happened. We know that exists. These are normal parts of being human, and to isolate them and put a dogma on them and say it has to happen a certain way, it's just so out of, I think, what birth teaches us anyway. The idea that having a provider really does come into play here. They're really adamant to say, like, any licensed provider is no benefit to you. It's going to only be there for their own agenda. And I think that's one of the things that is hard to hear because, one, I know that it's different. I know that I didn't become a midwife to be beholden to the state. No midwife has ever said that. They're like, oh, yes, I love the way the state runs birth. No one says that. but you can get indoctrinated just like you can in any governmental system or anything where you need a license.
One of the things that Emily and Yolanda often say in Free Birth Society podcasts and content that they put out is that there are no unicorns. When searching for a midwife, there is no midwife who is going to put the birthing mother above their licensure and their responsibilities to the state or to their certification. I don't think that's inherently true. I think that's kind of an oversimplification. Why would they say that? Why is that not the
Why
whole
is that the
story?
story? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important point because one, I know it's not true. And I think that's why you know it's not true because we work together and we know that women still get to make the choices. And there are midwives, unfortunately, a majority, probably more than half of the midwives with a license in this country, probably in the world, still feel at risk for their own safety if they don't do what their license requires of them. So they are living also with some ideas that they can be charged or criminalized or even as simple as like ousted in their own community, being seen as sort of like a reckless midwife. Yeah, midwives are a small community in any town that they're in any locale because there's very few midwives per capita everywhere in this country. Austin's actually one of the highest per capita places for midwifery. So the other side of that too is that what really happens is that midwives do give choice and they have to document that they're giving that choice and someone's refusing it. So a lot of it comes down to language and again, trust in the relationship that's getting built between the family, the mom, the husband, because also if there's a partner involved who is skeptical or doubting, it's scary on the midwife side or the person who has this seeming authority or this seeming responsibility to do very specific things that are regulated in some law book or rule book or right or code. And that's scary. And it's scary to everyone because we all grew up in this bureaucratic, litigious environment. So it becomes the rule. And I know to my core that like, women are to be trusted. They know what's going on in their body. Sometimes this process of giving birth is where they learn how to trust that. They
Mm.
learn how their intuition works. And you need support in that process, period. So I think most midwives have a good heart. And yes, I do think they are scared of the system. And but I do think there are many of us that are practicing midwives with licensure or without that know how the system works and can follow within the provided framework without getting in trouble and also honoring the woman's journey, right?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And when they say there is no unicorns, my initial reaction is something we've talked about. Unicorns, these midwives who know how to navigate the system while prioritizing the mother and baby and prioritizing the relationship, prioritizing mother's autonomy. These women cannot be influencers because there's so much nuance, there's so much gray area. And these midwives that are working in communities, they could also potentially come under a lot of heat and scrutiny in a way that hospitals are not, despite hospitals having poorer outcomes. A lot of these midwives that I know and doulas choose not to be super outspoken
Yeah.
online
Yeah.
and choose not to be influencers, which is funny because then these two influencers, Emily and Yolanda, are constantly disparaging women who are not as present online as they are.
Right. Right.
One of my critiques of Free Birth Society is that there is not a lot of emphasis on the actual mechanics of physiological birth. They have an extremely expensive midwifery and birth attendant program that I had considered. And upon looking more deeply into the curriculum, it was a lot more about conscious leadership and how to have clear relationships, but not a lot of material around physiological birth. And that kind of threw a flag for me. How important is that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I have experienced from their content as well. So I followed more Yolanda content. I know that she is pretty thorough in her critiques of the system, right? Like she can really point out a lot of things that I see as the person on the front line with women doing birth. But I also hear many times where she says things and I'm like, that's not how it goes. That's not what really happens when you're sitting in front of a woman and this experience is coming up, right? You do have to have a skill set of leadership, relationship building, assessing needs and personality traits, because a lot of that does come up in your birth, right? Like how you are is going to show up in your birth. So there's some value there. But if you don't actually see the problems firsthand, the shoulder dystocia, the preeclampsia, the associated risks that arise from any one of those things, like if you haven't done it yourself with your hands on, which I would venture to say neither of them have because of their stance, right? Because they say don't attend to women. And I think in the article Emily's quoted as saying, what did she say? If this happened, I would never interfere with the mom's ability to resuscitate her baby. I wouldn't suggest helping that baby breathe, right? I would just wait and let that baby have its own entrance into the world. And until you've seen, which again, we're seeing in this article, the negative outcome of doing that, waiting 5 minutes, 13 minutes to help a baby get oxygen, that's obviously alive, but you're choosing not to help. So what are the implications to that? We could really go through lots of detail, but I think you can't show up for women unless you're showing up to make the outcome the best it can be, right? It's not going to be great in many scenarios. There's going to be problems. There's going to be trauma because we're human. We all come with our own baggage. We all come with a story to that birth moment. And if you're not using your relationship skills and your intuitive capacity as a woman, as a support person at birth, as a licensed midwife out of birth, you're not doing your job either way, right? If you're meant to do nothing and sit on your hands, why are you there? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not going to bring someone water, if you're not going to help hold her leg, if you're not going to help her get to the toilet, why did you show up? If she needs those things, of course. I think that's the physiology that's missing in a lot of these conversations. And how could the outcomes be different with a different person present? The nuance of what's happening in everybody's lives is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
variance. One thing I think Free Birth Society gets right is the huge variation of normal. I think that's a very helpful idea for midwives and for anybody giving birth. The hospital really narrows the variation of normal to what is convenient for billing, for their billing
Mm-hmm.
department, and what is convenient for insurance and for their regulatory practices. That only accounts for about this much of birth versus what is safe and normal is actually much larger. I think they get that right. But there's this sort of laissez-faire attitude on those edges. Uh, well, if you just do the work, it's going to turn out okay. If you just get out of your own way, it's going to be all right. And I think this is why we're seeing this article, because so many women have gotten burned believing that philosophy. Yolanda's a very intellectual person, so her philosophy is easy to listen to. She's very articulate about these difficult pieces. But there's a difference between the philosophy and then what you're saying, the embodiment, the being in front of a woman, and the
Mm-hmm.
nuances of birthing inside an ecosystem of relationships and environments.
Yep. And that's the big thing. If your stance and your philosophy is that system's wrong, so get completely out of it and do the complete opposite of what it does, like you're just recreating another problem on the other end, right?
Mhm.
It is helpful to hear that birth with no one licensed or experienced can go well. They don't even
Mhm.
really talk about that in the article. We don't really hear any good stories of free birth from this investigation. Owning your whole process, your whole physiologic experience, you then become, you're giving the power back to a system that is already in place, right? Because it is valuable to hear that we can do it different, that women are powerful and capable and aware and intuitive. And the women, even in the article, I think they believe that still. I think the thing they didn't get was trust and support.
Mhm.
All of the things you've already highlighted, like if your husband's not on board, if your community's not on board, just stand on your own. While that's a cool long-term philosophy, in the moment while you're pregnant and growing a human and needing to eat and feed yourself, that's not going to work really well. And it's going to cause actually some of the problems. Like the fact that you're internally struggling battling your environment, get to a point where you're like, well, I just have to give in to something, and it's going to be my partner, my husband, my mom, who's a nurse, who's telling me it has to be this way. Those affect your physiology and it affects the outcome of your birth. Just being by yourself and trusting that birth is normal is not going to get you, it's not even part of the work. Like, like they're talking about, it's not even this inner work. It's just a little bit spiritual bypassy and disassociation, right? It's actually not helping you, because if you don't have enough time to tune in and to get in touch with your own process and realize that you need 4 people next to you to birth because you're that person, then you're going to have a bad outcome. Is, again, a wide range, but like, yeah, maybe you'll end up in the hospital and that will be considered a failure, and then you'll have your own shame cycle that you'll go through. So I definitely think that that's one of the things where you have to start breaking down the nuance and finding the middle ground in these conversations and consider. Then we can start talking about, what state are you? Is there a unicorn in your neighborhood? Is there actually value because you're actually ill or you're actually having a problem in your pregnancy that does need a remedy? Like, you cannot trust enough. Like, if your body's already physically doing something, yeah, you're ignoring what your body's telling you instead of trusting.
I think one of the biggest issues of free birth is the wild pregnancy piece. Some of the purists don't even use pregnancy tests because they want to just completely trust their body and be in it. And anything that's external, that's giving you any information, is somehow like deleterious to this experience, the spiritual experience, which is absurd, in my opinion,
Yes.
because having some feedback from another person that you trust is really useful, both to your nervous system and to your experience at large. I can see how it stands in contrast to getting feedback from a system that you don't trust, from an OBGYN who's trying to scare you into scheduling a C-section. First time moms get scared into a C-section. There's no way the baby's going to come out. His head's too big. There's like no scientific basis for that.
Yeah. Right. And like, this is one of those things where it's like, if we had any culture of support already for women and birth and normalcy of it, like, you couldn't even hear that and think it's true, right? Like, the fact that there's still women that can like feel that way shows that we have a lot of work to do as women, and I keep saying as a society, but it's like understanding of birth and what it is. That power of knowing has been given over a long time ago.
Yeah. So on the one hand, there's this risk of overregulation and being pushed into these incentive systems that are not serving a woman or her baby. But then on the other hand, we have this extreme of no accountability. And I think that's what the article is pointing out, is that when these poor outcomes happened with these free birthers, which is not the whole story of free birth, but with these women who are struggling with this outcome, there's no accountability from Emily or Yolanda. There's no humility, even remorse. And you go
Yeah.
so far to one extreme, you become the thing you hate on the other side.
Yeah, so true. Um, that there was a point when I started hearing accounts and posts and writings from Yolanda and Emily where I'm like, they're getting a little too far out of, they're gonna turn people so far away from even themselves. It's like that dogmatic energy is back. Lack of accountability. I think remorse is a really big thing that, even as I read the article, I hadn't even really considered that, because as someone that's walking with women the whole time, like, I just assumed they were actually at least counseling these women or having conversations like, why did this happen? Could there have been some other area in that woman's story that we could have helped? How can we do better? I was sort of delusionally thinking they might be adjusting their conversations around these new experiences. But it sounds like even in the article, that's not happening. Maybe there was a little point getting made that maybe they're having to recalibrate their conversation, but I don't know. We'll see. This is very new on the stage, and Emily had her own tragic experience that she's dealing with at the same time that this is coming out. So it's really hard. I mean, I'm not making any judgments. My experience of all of this has been a long time coming. I had experienced a free birth and I listened to them talk about this concept, and having already done it, even already knew that they're kind of speaking a little bit out the side of their mouth. They're trying to have a platform. They're trying to do the extreme. Again, this is my opinion, but it sounds like they're just really trying to gain traction instead of truly support individual women. They want to elevate the conversation. I think they've done it. And now we're cycling back to like the fallout where women don't get any support. Even inside the groups, I've heard other women feel a little regretful, or I don't know if regretful is a strong word, but they're like, I didn't get as much as I wanted from the experience of free birth itself, not the society. But this is where I land. I also have a free birth consult available, and I put it on my site years ago because of this exact conversation where women are considering it and they don't have anywhere to look except for the Free Birth Society, which again is not local, but I wanted to be able to be a sounding board for women going through this process, whether they ended up free birthing or not. I've heard plenty of good free birth stories, like plenty. Women have free births. They feel good about it. But if I'm talking to them, I guess it's because something wasn't quite the way that they wanted it. Like if they're talking to me about it at that point, whatever, before, after, during, it's because they're feeling a gap in a need, right? And I don't know how many women out there are loving their autonomous, wild, free pregnancy. I don't know. I'd be curious.
I certainly felt quite lonely when I was considering free birth because I didn't really have anyone to talk to. I found one local friend and she helped me so much. And she ended up birthing with you as well. Well, this was a really wonderful conversation touching on why this conversation is happening in the mainstream and the nuanced pieces that are part of all of this. I really worry that some of these journalistic pieces, because they have the mainstream bias that's also subject to similar profit incentives, that these pieces are going to be used to ramp up regulation. And we're seeing that already in different places. So I definitely wanted to bring that to the front. We are women who value health freedom, and we have to have these conversations as well.
I think that's exactly why we need to have a conversation, right? So that we hear perspectives other than just the one that's in the mainstream, and it gives women more comfort, confidence in exploring these options without repercussion or without fear of being shunned or being out on the edges.
Steph, where can people find you if they want midwifery care?
Yeah, definitely reach out. My website, stephberry.com, and our new space and collective, the Wild Wellness Co. We've got a team of us working together.
We'll drop links in the description. Thank you so much for watching this episode. Please like and subscribe. It helps us reach other mothers who are building wealth and wellness outside of the system. We believe mothers are the backbone of the hyperlocal future. So if that's you, please join us. We welcome you.